Love it. It is a wonderful world we live in. And you look around, you see the creativity of the divine in science. And one of my favorite episodes of The Big Bang Theory, by the way, y'all ever watch The Big Bang Theory? I don't know why you're laughing. Leonard was having a conversation with some girl that he was dating, and he was like, I am a physicist. And he says, I kind of peel back the universe and I look at God and say, I see what you did there and I like it. I thought that was kind of a good way to look at what physicists do. I like it. Yeah, how many of you all think of yourself as a creative person? Raise your hand up nice and high. Own it. Say, I'm a creative person. Or that's what they tell me at least, right? You want to be humble. You don't want to brag. I understand that, right? Some of us think of ourselves as creative. Some of us don't think of ourselves as creative. When I say the word creativity, when you think about creativity, like what comes to mind? Like, do you think of art? Do you think of like a musician? Do you think of people who design clothes maybe, right? That's kind of how we tend to think about art or creativity. Or we think about nature. We think about, we're right here nestled up against the Rocky Mountains, right? You think of that's creative, right? That's how we tend to think about creativity. But what about creativity in things like problem solving, right? What about creativity in tax planning? Maybe not so much. Right? How about creativity in dinner? It's like, what are we going to have for dinner tonight? What do we have in the freezer? Right? What's the opposite of creativity? Let me ask that question. This is a good group participation. Shout out. What do you think is the opposite of creativity? You're going to have to speak up and enunciate. Boring is one. What was it? Me is the opposite of creativity. I love it. Fair enough. Fair enough. I won't argue. I don't know you well enough. That's good. What else? What else comes to mind when you think of, how about some over here? Creativity. Opposite of creativity. Plain. Okay. Tunnel vision. I like it. You can come take over whoever said tunnel vision. That's really good. The notes are right on the back. Just follow along, right? Status quo, that's good. Yeah, we tend to have a pretty narrow definition of creativity though, right? We tend to think about creativity in those terms of like Picasso and like those people that are super inventive and like they can paint and they can draw and they can sing. And it's like Kia, she could just sing the phone book and we'd be enamored, right? Super creative, right? Find versions of songs like that and do those, right? That's when we think of creativity. But here's the thing, positive psychologists give us a really different understanding of this idea of creativity, right? So positive psychology tells us that creativity is thinking of new ways to do things. New ways to do things. It involves producing ideas or behaviors that aren't original, right? So it's this idea of that are original, excuse me. So it's this idea of, I have this situation in front of me. I have these circumstances in front of me. I have this difficult moment, let's say. And creativity from the standpoint of positive psychology says, figuring out a new way to do that. And they would call this little c creativity, right? Little c creativity. And it's like a character strength. There's all these character strengths that we all have to a certain degree. And creativity is like a spectrum. It's found in degrees. At one end of the spectrum are those people like John Smith that have more creative ideas in one morning than most of us will have in our lifetime, right? That's just there's people out there like that. They have that. They're the filmmakers among us, right? They are the people that are inventing, and they're scientists and they're painters and they're musicians and they're writing music, right? About experiences that we resonate with. And those are oftentimes called like the big C creatives, right? But there is this small c creative in our everyday creativity, everyday ingenuity. And it's when we come up with something new, when we come up with maybe a more direct route or a different route home to enjoy a view. We think of a new way to solve a problem in our lives. And most of you, believe it or not, are actually capable of small c creativity. Right? We don't have to pull out, you can pull out a canvas and you can paint if you want to, but most of us are capable of coming up with new creative, inventive ideas in our everyday normal lives. And so what really distinguishes creative people, the science tells us, is not intelligence. How many of you say amen? Right? It's not intelligence. It's a general tendency to approach new dilemmas with a commitment to trying new solutions. How many of you ever faced new problems? Oh, good, you're alive, right? How many of you don't have to raise your hand, but you'd say, right now I'm in a new dilemma in life. Right now I'm experiencing this new circumstance, this new situation, this new problem. Well, creativity is recognizing in that moment there is an opportunity to find a new solution. And I love, one of my favorite stories that we have of the life of Jesus is Jesus doing this, finding creative solutions for a new problem. How many of you have ever heard of the story where Jesus feeds the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish? Notice I said fish and not fishes. Actually, both are correct, believe it or not, but fish is more proper in my humble opinion. Now, stop me. If you've heard this story, tell me when I get it wrong. Okay? So the general idea of the story is Jesus has been droning on and on and on all day long. And the crowds love it. It's like Crossroads here when I really get into it. You just lean in. You're like, we don't need lunch. We don't need dinner. Just keep going, Ryan. Keep going. That was the same thing. I was super Christ-like and you were super crowd-like. It's amazing when we get in sync like that. And so he's got this big crowd, and all of a sudden it gets late, and the disciples are like, Jesus, like, we got to send him off and feed. And he goes, no, you feed him. And so they go out into the crowd, and they find this little kid, and they steal his lunch. And this little kid's got 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he brings them to Jesus, and Jesus blesses it, and as he starts handing it out, it just never ends, right? And then everybody is filled, right? That's the story. What if I told you that's not the story? I just tricked you. That's what you think the story is, but it's not the story in Matthew. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to read from Matthew the actual story and see if we can't see something that's maybe not as fanciful, but is just as miraculous. So in Matthew chapter 14, this is Matthew's version of the story. Okay? So Matthew chapter 14, verse 15 through 20, it says this: when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, this is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves. Now, Jesus, being just like any other person who likes a crowd, is never going to send the crowd away. Like once you get a crowd, you just want to keep them, right? He says, oh, hold on a second. The disciples are like, you got to send them all away. They got to go. They got to buy food for themselves. Like we can't keep this going. And Jesus says to them, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. And the disciples are like, oh my gosh. Jesus, listen. They said, we have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's all we've got. Now, who's a part of this story so far? There's no little boy in this story. There's no finding somebody who's willing to give their all and to let Jesus bless it. And so we're going to receive an offering now, and you give your all, and Jesus, no, like there's none of that in this version of the story. There's no little boy who has his lunch stolen, nothing like that. Jesus says to the disciples, you feed them. They look at each other and they go, what do you have? What do you have? What do you have? What do you have? And they go, we got 5 loaves and 2 fish, which makes sense for 12 people in antiquity. They're poor. Why would one little boy have 5 loaves of bread and 2 whole fish with him? Think about it. That's craziness right there. Like he doesn't want to carry that. First of all, why would a little boy be listening to Jesus for 8 hours one day anyway? But that's not Matthew's. Matthew cleans up the story, right? Or Matthew has a little different version. So the disciples go, this is what we brought. We planned ahead, Jesus. They're not our problem. That's just what we've got. See, the disciples were stuck. They're stuck on what they had for themselves. So the problem is all these people are going to get hungry. We got to feed them. We can't feed them. We need to send them away. So they're stuck in this problem, and now they're just giving the normal solution, send everybody away. And what does Jesus say? Jesus says, no. Bring them here to me. Give me the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. Bring them here. And see, in this moment, what we see is Jesus seeing a circumstance, and he's offering an opportunity to the disciples to be courageously creative. That's what he's doing. Because here's what I know, creativity takes courage. If you're going to try something new, if we as a church are going to try something new, if we're going to lean into something and go after it and look for new ways to do things, to solve problems, that takes courage. And that's what Jesus does. He says, bring it here to me. And so he brings it over here, and he has the crowds sit down on the grass. So he's in front of everybody, right? He has the crowd sit down on the grass. And it says that he took the 5 loaves and he took the 2 fish. He looked up to heaven, he blessed and he broke the loaves and he gave them to the disciples. And then the disciples gave them to the crowd. Like, this isn't going to go very well. But look what happens. All ate and were filled. All ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, and there were 12 baskets full. See, what I think happened here was people actually came a little prepared. But people live in a scarcity mindset. It's just part of the human condition. And we hold what's ours. And I think Jesus took what the disciples had, brought it in front of everybody, said, this is what we have, spread it around, prayed for it. People saw the creativity, the generosity, it was contagious, and then they shared what they had with everybody else, and at the end of the day, everybody had enough plus more. Now, I think you can read this story as a divine miracle of bread rematerializing over and over and over again. I've just never seen that happen. And I actually think it's harder to believe people share. I think it's harder to believe that people who would be living in the status that they would have been living in economically, where food would be very difficult, where when Jesus taught them to pray, give us today our daily bread, it was literally, we need bread today. There was no storing it up. That I think it was actually a bigger miracle for people to share what they had brought and for the whole crowd to be fed through the example. And what we see here is Jesus calling the disciples to say, hey, what if we just model something? What if we try something different? What if we live for others? What if we just share and trust that love will take over? Trust that this example can actually reshape our hearts and our lives. And I wonder if we could imaginatively read this story that way and be transformed more than imaginatively reading the story as if there was a materialization, a miraculous materialization of bread as it was being handed out. Because I would suggest that it is equally, if not a greater materialization of bread for everybody to just be like, well, I guess I have some too, and start sharing it. And I think what this story tells us, and I think a great theme that we see in the life of Jesus and what we see in really healthy spirituality is that peacemakers, right? People who are trying to follow Jesus, they use what they have. They use those creative gifts. And here at Crossroads, we talk about using those gifts both here within the church and outside the church. So if you think of like the disciples in that story, what gift did they have? Yes, they had 5 loaves and 2 fish. And they brought that. And they said, I'm going to use that. And we're going to use it to impact others. And I think that's a great image of what we see. And we see this in the teachings of Paul. We see it in the history and the traditions of the church. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul's writing to the Corinthians and he says, there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. What Paul's getting at is that there is a creative nature to the universe. That there's a creative way in which you've been formed and fashioned and you have gifts. And all of these gifts are different and they've all been given by the same divine reality. And so when you look around in this room, when you look outside, when you look in your neighborhood, every person on this planet has gifts. Every person on this planet has wonderful talents, things to offer for peace on earth, for one another. Ephesians, the writer of Ephesians chapter 2 says, we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do, what's it say? Good works. When we take our gifts and we use them to do good works, we're living in the divine stream, the divine flow of life. And we do that not worrying about what we don't have. We don't do that worrying, well, I wish I had this gift or I wish I had that gift. No, he said, this is what I have. This is what we have. We got 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus, that's what we got. Send them away. We already thought about feeding them. We actually collect it. No. If we just focus on what we have and how we can use it, what that will spark is powerful. See, Jesus told the disciples, you got to feed the crowd. They just brought what they had. Their generosity and Jesus' courageousness to be creative inspired the crowd, and everybody was fed. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that challenges me. with not getting caught up in all the problems that have to be solved in the world, all the people that need to be reached, all the things that need to happen. If I can just bring what I can bring to the moment of need, if I can just bring what I have, the gifts, the talents, the creativity that I can bring to the moment, to the body of Christ, this group of people, then I can trust others to do the same. And so here's what I don't want us to miss as we kind of begin to roll around in this idea of creativity. And that is that creativity and generosity infuse divine power into difficult circumstances. And I think that's what we see in this wonderful story that Matthew gives us. Is that when people are courageous enough to be creative with the gifts and talents that they have, we infuse that moment, we infuse that challenge with the power of the divine. And miracles happen. How many of y'all have experienced a miracle in your own life? You can't explain it, you don't know, but you know what? Here's what I guarantee. Like, people were involved. Fair enough? Somebody said, I'm going to use my gift, my talent, and I'm going to participate. And what happens? Bread and fish materialize. Right? When we're willing to be those broken vessels, when we're willing to bring our gifts and our talents outside of ourselves for the love of other people, for peace on earth, all of a sudden, it's like we just open up the windows of heaven. And that's a metaphor, by the way. There are no windows in heaven, okay? And God's not in heaven. It's just a metaphor. Right? We open up into our lives. It's like I used to teach this all the time, and I don't teach it quite the same way, but I still believe it, that obedience unleashes the power of God in our lives. I believe that wholeheartedly. But I don't believe it's obedience to some moral list of do's and don'ts. Here's who you sleep with. Here's who you don't sleep with. Here's the music you listen to. Here's the music you don't listen to. No. But when we are obedient to love, when we are obedient to generosity, when we are obedient to kindness, when we are obedient to all of these things, then undoubtedly the divine power is manifest in our actions, in our lives in ways that are incomprehensible. And I believe that deeply. Now, sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes we run up against obstacles. Sometimes there's a Red Sea that needs to be parted, right? Another metaphor. But there's something about that life of faithfulness, the choice, the conscious choice to live in love, to live in generosity, to creatively look to solve problems. So I want to encourage you in your everyday normal life, tap into your creativity. As a church, that's what we're doing. Can I hit the pause button and can we be real for a moment? Is that okay? No? You don't want to be real? Okay. Everything's great. It's wonderful. So you're going to start to hear, those of you who are members in our church, we're coming into our Christmas season. Our Christmas season is our Peace is Worth It initiative we launch every year, which is a funding initiative, which is a fundraiser for nonprofit language, right? It's what we do. And this year we're supersizing our Peace is Worth It because our church is in some significant challenges financially. Challenges that we weren't expecting. Some things had come up over the past 6 months that just all converged at one time and have put us as a church in a pretty unique situation. And the beauty is we're growing as a church. Like we're seeing more people come. We feel that's wonderful. In a lot of ways, our giving, our generosity is growing, but we had a couple of things come our way this last spring that we just weren't expecting that have really inhibited our kind of strategic plan for the next few years. One of those was we had a very generous family in our church that their circumstances changed, and they gave a very large gift throughout the year, and they're no longer able to do that. They're no longer doing that. We weren't expecting that. We had the state of Colorado. One of our big missional identities is reaching into poverty, right? And reshaping poverty into wellness and financial well-being. Another unacceptable truth that we shape is illiteracy. And so our center, our early childhood center, is focused on being a space for folks that find themselves in poverty. So we work with the state of Colorado. We have a high number of families that leverage our center who are on support. And we made a decision that we were not going to follow the pattern of most early childhood centers that limit the number of families that are on support to be a part of the center. We said our mission, that's not what we're here for. And the state of Colorado, well, particularly the county of Larimer, they I don't know, they ran out of funding for a lot of these families, and so they're not having any new families, and so that has set the center back a little bit, what we thought it was going to produce. We own some water shares that part of our 3-year strategic plan was to sell the water shares, which would give us some residual money as we're growing back, continuing to recover from COVID, continuing to really be a space that is anti-Christian nationalism, that is inclusive, that's not exactly popular right now in a lot of Christian circles. But we said this is who we are, and we'd rather close the doors than compromise that. Not that we're closing the doors, okay? Don't freak out on me. But that's affected things. And so we found ourselves this year at looking at a $300,000 deficit and asking big questions about how do we continue to do the work that we want to do. And we need time to figure that out. And so this year, our Peace is Worth It campaign, we're supersizing it. And we're just kind of coming to the congregation and saying, here's what we can do and here's what we need to do. And we've been creative with fundraising. We've already raised about a little over $100,000 of that. I've called people that I know who love our church, who I think love me, and said, hey, you want to help support my salary for the next year? You want to help us out? And so we've got people in our leadership, our board, our council, many of them, they've all said, this is what we're going to give towards it. Wendy and I have made a commitment that over the next 2 years, we're going to give 10% of that deficit each year. I have no idea how we're going to do that, but we believe in this place. And I only know to model generosity and to be creative. And so I'm going to drive an Uber on the weekends if you need a ride. Maybe I'll come pick you up. I'm going to look for creative ways, but we're committed to figuring out how to do this and how to continue doing this beautiful work here. And so we're coming up with inventive solutions. We have people who use our facility that are in alignment with our values. And so we have some really neat opportunities that are showing up for partnerships to come. And you might see that we're a polling center, so the polls are here. And we're raising revenue all kinds of creative ways. And so over the next couple of weeks, you're going to hear about how you all, our congregation, can help vote and participate in what this is going to look like over the next 2 years. And you'll hear more details about it at our membership meeting. But here's the thing, like when we started kind of thinking about this, I'm not going to lie to you, I was like, holy Jesus of Nazareth. Like I've got 5 loaves and 2 fish. And we just said, what are we going to do? How are we going to, and we believed that, well, let's lead the way. Let's bring our 5 loaves and our 2 fish. Let's believe in where we're going, and let's get creative. And so you'll hear more about that. But basically, you should just know over the next couple of weeks, everybody's going to hear about how you can participate for 2 years as we grow back and as we grow into this beautiful thing that we've been talking about. And we're seeing new faces, and people come and tell us their stories that are gut-wrenching. And I'm so grateful that we're here because there is no place like this. There's no place like this. And so I want to encourage you to start thinking about that and praying. And if you're not a prayer person, then just talk to your spouse about it. It's generally the same thing. Right? Let's be honest, folks. To say, what can we do? How can we participate? But you'll hear more about that. But we're looking for creative solutions and excited about the future. And, you know, I feel like when you're going in the right direction of love and peace, you're bound to face some opposition. And so we're excited about the future. I'm excited about the future. And we're trying to live this out. This is part of our creative, value as a church. And I look forward to sharing more about this, but I hope that right now you'll just start thinking about, okay, well, what can we do? And here's kind of what the thought is. If 200 households gave $25 extra a week, we'll cover the difference. 200 households, 25, that's about every household that calls themselves Crossroads right now. And some of us can't give $25 a week. I get it. Some of us can give more than $25 a week, right? And this is a season in the life of our church where it is like, okay, how can we get creative in doing what we're doing and being that place for the disenfranchised and the disconnected and the deconstructing? How do we continue to be this light in this place? And so you'll get to hear more about that. But that's what we want to do. So in what we know is creativity, doing this, we had to give ourselves permission to be creative, right? And you have to do this in your own life, in your everyday normal life. Creativity says, I've got to give myself permission. So we've got to think creatively. Who else can use our facility? How can we generate revenue than typically is done inside the life of a church? What are some things that we can do to fund this beautiful work? And in your own life, you have to give yourself permission because it takes courage and you might fail. You might try some things. You might think, I'm going to try this new route home, and then there's a road that's closed or it's blocked off and you didn't see it, right? So you have to give yourselves permission. And here's what else I know, is you got to give yourself time to be creative. And that's part of what we're talking about as a church, is we have to have time to creatively discern the best path forward as a church and how to do this work effectively and where to do it and all of those things. And so you have to give yourself time because creativity isn't always easy. Sometimes you just have to sit back and you got to think and you got to give yourself permission to, it almost feels like you're doing nothing, but you're just being still. And that's a part of what we're doing as leadership and as a staff and as a council and as members, is we need a season to be still and know that God is present. To be still and know that the decisions that this church has made for the last 25 years are all on purpose and are all made in a direction that we feel the divine has called this place to be, no matter what that looks like. And so in your own life, give yourself time, block off time to just creatively think about a solution. There's something going on in your life, a new problem, a new circumstance. I know it, I get it. Like, my reaction is to just jump in and start solving problems. But sometimes I just have to stop, set everything aside, and I just need to sit and I need to just be soak in the reality, and I have to start looking at it from different perspectives. I have to start examining, if I come at it from this angle or if I come at it from this angle, I have to do that as the leader of an organization. I have to do that as part of a family. Sometimes we just get stuck in trying to solve things the same exact way. And we just have to give ourselves permission and time to look for other solutions. And I want to encourage you, as you think about this in all these areas of your life, to bring it into your spiritual growth. Be creative in your spiritual growth. You'd say, Ryan, I feel like my spiritual life is dry right now. I feel like I'm not where I want to be. I feel distant to the divine. Okay. Rather than just back engaging with same practices, same principles, same ways of growth, hit the pause button, try some new things. You say, well, I read my Bible every day. I just don't feel anything. Stop reading your Bible every day then. I am not joking. Pick up something else. Pick up your favorite author. Do that for devotions. And just right before you do it, say, Lord, just give me joy and peace as I read this Amish novel, whatever it is. Which, by the way, if you ever hack into my Kindle and you see all this Amish stuff, it's my mother-in-law, not me. So don't be judging me on the Amish smut in my Kindle library. It's all Cindy. Maybe. I don't know. What are ways that you can bring some creativity into your own spiritual growth, right? Try some new things. Give yourselves permission. Try it out. Oh, that didn't work. That made me feel worse about myself. Well, stop, right? Try some new things. See what happens. That's the joy of the journey and being creative, right? Big C creative people, right? I can promise you this. They don't sit down and the first thing they do be perfect, right? The painting always evolves. The novel always is under revision. It's a process. And here's what's so beautiful about big C creativity, little c creativity, the creativity of us as a church looking at our finances and thinking about the future, is creativity sparks innovation. But creativity sparks innovation, and innovation breathes new life into our worlds. Innovation breathes new life into our workplaces. When we have a problem at work and we say, I'm going to be inventive, I'm going to be creative, innovation shows up and new things happen. Creativity sparks innovation in our families. You feel like your family is pressing up against this struggle. We're just not moving forward. I don't feel like we're growing in intimacy. We're not growing closer. Okay, great. Let's try something else. And here's what happens. All of a sudden, creativity, even little c creativity, gets innovation going. Creativity sparks innovation in medicine. Think about that. All the advancements we have in medicine, all the advancements that we have. Entertainment, right? I love creativity produces invention and entertainment. Our world of entertainment gets stale, and somebody comes up with a new thing called reality television. You're like, this is dumb. It's like, well, thank you, MTV and the real world circa 1993. Now we have it everywhere, right? But that's what happens. Like when we start to get creative, we innovate new ideas, new ways of being in the world. And to me, that is just mirroring the image of the divine, who's always at work creating inventive and new ways of intersecting our circumstances. And that's really what I want to encourage you with today as we have communion together. We're going to come to these communion tables that's set, if you're at a table, here in the front and in the back for everyone. These are creative symbols that represent God's presence among us. And I want to encourage you, if you're in a circumstance today, and that circumstance is new, or that circumstance has been around for a long time, and you just can't seem to figure out a way forward, I just want to encourage you during this time to give yourself permission to throw out everything you've tried and just listen for God. Just listen for the Spirit. Listen for whispers. And maybe give yourself permission and give yourself some time over the next month to just sit and soak in this statement of faith, that God is a creative reality. And that the circumstances that you're in, the hurts that you're experiencing, the fears that are so overwhelming, that there is a God who is bigger than all of those things. And give yourself permission to look for ways to experience that creativity, to find yourself in a flow, a new season, a new way of seeing, a new way of being. And maybe you're here and you're in a situation and you're like, Ryan, things couldn't be better. I would say two things to you. Fill out your Pieces Worth It pledge soon. But more importantly, come to this table with this prayer. God, open my eyes to see those around me. Give me the courage to be creative and intrusive in their life, so that I might be a source of invention, so that I might be a source of healing, so that I might be a source of provision. Because that goes back to what we said a few weeks ago, that this life lived in Christ is not lived for you, and it's not lived for others, it's lived for one another. That's the beauty of it. And it's so hard for some of us to let other people come alongside and help carry our burdens. But that's part of what has to happen in a healthy community, is that we just humble ourselves and let people experience the joy of loving us. And I know from our family standpoint, we get overwhelmed by some of you in good ways, So that ought to be your prayer. If you're in that season where you just feel like, man, we've come through it, we've walked, that's awesome. And so let this be a moment to say, so we're going to turn our hearts towards being that creative answer to prayer. Like my goal in life is to spend more time answering prayer than praying. That's my goal in life. Sometimes I just don't trust God to get the job done. And don't act like you do all the time either. So, I'm going to invite you to stand if you're able to, as we sing these two songs that speak to the majesty, the beauty, the creativity, the grandeur of the divine, and our response to that. Again, everyone is welcome at the table. These are symbols, they're metaphors, they're images that materialize, make visible what is invisible, and that is love that is present among us as we live this out. The body of Christ broken for you, the blood of Christ shed for you. Come, eat and drink.